All right, welcome back to the Assassinations investigation or audit. This is video number 88, and again, I'm going to continue on this Albert Osbourne in all my videos from now on until we get to the end of these 50 FBI documents because I think it's very important. Apparently, the FBI considered it so important that they dedicated 50 freaking pages, tons of man hours, hundreds of thousands of dollars back in 1963 to investigate this guy. And not only did they investigate him, they started off investigating him from the very, very, very beginning. Okay? So the FBI agents were doing their job. Okay? Their job is to follow the leads, follow the facts and the evidence where it leads them. Okay? That's what the FBI was trained to do. That's what they were doing. Apparently, they thought this guy, Albert Osbourne, or John Howard Bowen, was so important that they used the facilities and finances and agents of the FBI to follow up on them until about, I think, March, April of 1964, when all of a sudden, we're going to read the very, very end, everything just drops, completely cut off. They go into extensive details in all these pages, way beyond what you would think would be for a normal person. For some reason, okay? For some reason. Anyway, so we're going to continue, and right here in December 20th, 1963, less than a month afterward, they're on it. They're actually on it before this. But this is a continuation paragraph from the previous page. It says, in this regard, it is pointed out that both Winston and Mumford had previously stated that they made a trip from Nuevo Laredo to Mexico City on a Flecha Roja bus on September 26th and 27th, 1963, and identified Lee Harvey Oswald as a passenger on that bus with whom they conversed. So there, you got, right after Kennedy announces that he's going to, the White House announces that Kennedy is going to be making campaign stops, fundraising stops in the South, in Louisiana, in Texas, specifically Houston, Austin, Fort Worth, and Dallas. As soon as that happens, they make that announcement, all these things change. Mrs. Payne just conveniently drives in from Washington, D.C. after seeing Martin Luther King's speech there in August. Conveniently shows up right at the end of September. Picks up Marina Oswald, takes her to Dallas with her. Conveniently, David Atlee Phillips all of a sudden becomes the head of anti-Cuban operations out of the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City. All these mechanisms click into place, and then Oswald is sent to Mexico City. And this is where we find him on this bus on September 26th, 27th. It says on December 20th and 27th, 1963, reviews were made of birth records, school board records, credit bureau records, city directories, newspaper morgues, and death records at Chester, Pennsylvania, with no information being developed to the identity of John Howard Bowen, born on January 14th, 1887, at Chester, Pennsylvania. So I'm just going to jump ahead. I think I mentioned it last time. What we're going to find out is there was another guy named John Howard Bowen who was also involved in the missionary work down in Mexico. He was an American, though, and he died. And what appears to happen is that this Albert Osbourne, this British-born Canadian American, whatever the hell he is, took over his identity. And maybe he did it to, I don't know, fundraise for him or whatever, or have a second identity, I'm not sure. But he starts going by John Howard Bowen in the U.S. and in Mexico. So he's doing this circuit of fundraising in the U.S., living at this estate, farm, whatever he has, boys club in Tennessee, living out of this hotel in Laredo, and then making these missionary trips in Mexico City. Apparently he runs into John Howard Bowen, who died. The mysterious thing is they never discover when he died and where he's buried. At least they don't mention it in the FBI memos here. So this Albert Osbourne is going by John Howard Bowen, but what's funny is he talks to this, we're going to see here, there is an informant in Mexico City that he talks to, and he talks about John Howard Bowen in the third person, but he's really him. And then we're going to see where Albert Osbourne talks to the FBI in Texas, in Louisiana, and another agent in Tennessee. These are three different offices here. And either acts like he's John Howard Bowen or pretends like he knows John Howard Bowen as a separate person and that he wasn't, using his identity. Anyway, so we'll go on here. It says, on January 7, 1964, confidential informant Dallas T4 Supra advised that John Howard Bowen has not been located in Mexico. Dallas T4 reported the interview on January 7, 1964, of a Reverend Albert Osbourne, an elderly Canadian missionary residing at 4-A Emilio Carranza Street, San Martin de Texmulican, State of Pueblo, who disclosed the following information. So this Dallas T4, is either an FBI or CIA agent who has an informant in Mexico City that interviewed the guy. All right. So Bowen has been in Mexico. So this is the informant talking to John Howard Bowen in Mexico City. And he repeats or summarizes what Bowen says. See, it's confusing even for me to say it. This is Albert Osbourne, speaking to the T4 informant in Mexico and talking about John Howard Bowen. Bowen has not been to Mexico since late September or early October 1963, at which time he advised Osbourne he was thinking of giving up his missionary work because of many of his contributors have helped him financially over the years are now deceased. So what you see is Osbourne, he's making a reason that they're not going to be able to find Bowen. He's also putting Bowen in his place when it was actually him, because he was sitting by Oswald, and so he's dissing himself and saying, no, that was Bowen. But he's also making it that Bowen disappears because he's retired. So it's very convenient. You got to wonder, why would someone do that if you haven't done anything wrong and it was you? You could just say, hey, yeah, I was sitting by this guy Oswald. I didn't know his name was Oswald at the time. He was just some young kid from New Orleans. That's all I knew. And I pointed out a few things in Mexico City to go see. And when we got to Mexico, I showed him around a little bit. Why wouldn't he do that? That would be the normal conversation, right? But yet, he pushes it off as this John Howard Bowen, which I'm pretty sure John Howard Bowen has died or has been murdered by Albert Osbourne in Mexico. Because they're not going to find, they checked death records, they're not finding him in the U.S. So John Howard Bowen is probably buried in some shallow grave in Mexico somewhere. And Albert Osbourne has taken over his identity. Whether he was killed by Albert Osbourne or died of a heart attack and then Osbourne took over his identity, I'm not sure. Anyway, let's see. Osbourne suggests that Bowen could be located to the Hotel Jung, New Orleans, Louisiana, where he was recently employed and making efforts to qualify for Social Security benefits. Osbourne also opted Bowen might be located to the Hotel St. Anthony in Laredo, Texas. All right, so hold on one second. All right, so here's the Hotel Jung, located right here. This is Dauphine Street. I think right here. Yeah, Dauphine Street's right here. This is where this is where Bertrand or Clay Shaw was living off of Dauphine Street, and I believe let's see. I believe the Trade Mart was down here. Over here is Jackson. This is Magazine, and right over here is where Oswald was working. So you kind of got the geography here. So I find it interesting that Osbourne took on a fake identity of this guy, just like Clay Shaw would take on the fake identity of Clay Bertrand. All right, hold on a second. And it says here, Osbourne claimed that he has no way of communicating with Bowen. Well, it's kind of hard when the guy's dead. And does not know his exact address in the United States, although he believed Bowen was in the United States at that time. He said Bowen never lived at 4-A Emilio Carranza Street, San Martin, Pueblo, but did pick up his mail there during his visit to Mexico in September and October 1963. All right, we'll keep going here. See, it's interesting that the Warren Commission, if there's no conspiracy, why are they including the FBI memos about Osbourne inside the Warren Commission? They're just packing? Is that what they're doing? Distracting? So apparently somebody at the commission thought this guy was worth looking into, just like because the FBI looked into it. The following investigation was conducted on January 13, 1964 by Special Agent Milton Kack, Harwood Holt, Auditor Jung Hotel, 1500 Canal Street, checked his records and advised that a John Howard Bowen is not presently employed by the Jung Hotel and has not been employed during the past 2 years. Mrs. Maxine, so apparently Bowen died 2 years ago. And again, Albert Osbourne, why is he saying that Jung was employed there, August, September of 1963, when he hasn't been there for 2 years? All right. So 2 years from January would be January 1962. So it says Ms. Maxine Matthews, secretary to George Dawson, manager, Hotel New Orleans, 1300 Canal Street. Oh, so they went around the block to different hotels to see if maybe he was employed there. Check their records and advise that John Howard Bowen is not employed at the present time by the Hotel New Orleans, nor has he been employed in the past 2 years. Reverend O.S. Ciccio, pastor, Canal Boulevard Baptist Church, 5320 Canal Boulevard, New Orleans, advised John is unknown to him. Reverend Ciccio stated that he would know Bowen if Bowen was living and working in New Orleans and was engaged in missionary work for the Baptist Church. See, this is how extensive the FBI goes into. They go to your neighbors, they go to people in your employment field, your occupation field, and they interview people to see if they've ever heard of you. So if you're a lawyer, they're going to go talk to lawyers in the bar association. Okay? If you're a minister, they're going to go talk to different reverends and churches. You know, no one's ever heard of them. So Miss Dorothy Patterson, secretary to Reverend John Gilbert, New Orleans Baptist Association, advised that she could find no record of her files of John Howard Bowen. Mrs. Patterson stated that if Bowen was engaged in missionary work for the Baptist Church in the New Orleans area, he would be listed in her files. You see? So this is what Albert Osbourne's doing, is it's actually him that was employed at the Jung Hotel, Albert Osbourne. It's actually him that was conducting missionary work. And what he's done is now he's distracted the FBI by saying, it was John Howard Bowen. If they were smart, they would ask about Osbourne at these locations too. Anyway, Dallas T4, same guy again, supervisor, reported that the photographs, too, of John Howard Bowen, one wearing a sun helmet and zipper jacket and the other of him standing before a castle-like edifice, were identified on that date, January 21st, 1963, by a servant of the residence of Alberto Osbourne at the residence of, and the Mexican minister in the same community as being identical with Osbourne. So, you see, he's taken on his name, John Howard Bowen, and using that identity there. Very interesting. So now they're starting to figure out this guy may be lying to us. Really? Dallas T4 further reported that Alberto Osbourne was interviewed on January 7, 1964. He was in possession of a Canadian passport and claimed residence at 4114 Drummond Street, Montreal, Canada. Correspondence was located in the residence of, so you got this address there bearing a return address of Walter Osbourne, Lincolnshire, England. Yeah, see, Grimsby. See, that's where the Grimsby call came from. So there was a phone call, I went over this last video, that a newspaper office near Grimsby received a phone call that was traced to a phone booth in Grimsby near Albert Osbourne's home. Okay, well, I guess this is Walter Osbourne. That morning of the 22nd, it was something like, if you want to see some interesting fireworks, look at Dallas later today, or something like that. And they reported this to the police, so it was some kind of foreshadowing of the assassination. There was also a call, I believe, to somebody at some embassy, I think the Australian embassy or something, around the same time, about the same thing. So I don't know. And then I also read this story about some Polish ambassador's driver heard a conversation about an assassination attempt would happen in Dallas, but who knows. Anyway, it says the servant at Texmulican, Mexico. See, so what we have is you've got the Dallas FBI or the Dallas military or the American military or the American Dallas FBI or even the CIA has developed these contacts with Mexican police, Mexican federales, and, they ask them for a favor. They run out and interview people in Mexico for them stake out a certain area, and then they give him money, or they help him, with other things in the U.S. Find out about Mexican nationals that are the government's interested in. It's kind of a two-way street there. Anyway, the servant at Texmelucan, Mexico, address stated Osbourne was then on a trip to an unknown part of the United States and indicated he may return to Mexico within the next 2 to 3 weeks. Dallas T4 reported that inquiry at the American Express office, Mexico City, Mexico, revealed Albert Osbourne was known there as John H. Bowen. You see? And last visited that office about 2 weeks prior to January 21st, 1964. So you see he's using these two identities. You got to wonder, why is he using these two identities? You can see the confusion. This is why the FBI is like, whoa, why is he using these two identities? Maybe there is a conspiracy going on here. He was with Osbourne. We got this guy traveling all over the United States and Mexico. Oswald was in Mexico. He sat by him on the bus to Mexico City. Something's going on here. I mean, sometimes the FBI is not the brightest guys, but even the dumbest guy in the FBI can figure out something's not right or kosher. All right. Further on, November 15, 1963, Bowman requested that letters to him be forwarded to an American Express, 649 Fifth Avenue, New York City, New York, New York. An American Express has no other address for him, but reported that Bowen frequently travels to Laredo and to San Antonio. Now, Osbourne mysteriously went to Grimsley and showed up at his brother and sister's house and stayed there and was there on the 22nd, the day of the assassination. So it gave him an alibi that, hey, I didn't shoot Kennedy. I wasn't even in the United States. But it also pins him to the Grimsley call, which is done from a phone booth just a few 100 yards from his house where his brother and sister lived. We're going to get into this interview too, they did. On January 27th, 1964, Dallas T4 reported that a Canadian missionary, Albert Osbourne, was known to the Mexican immigration authorities in 1958 as a missionary in Mexico, and inquiries then conducted failed to develop any background information on the value through investigation of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Canada. The Canadian address for Osbourne, then in possession of the Mexican immigration authorities, was found to be non-existent. A photograph of Osbourne obtained at that time appears to be the same person interviewed as Albert Osbourne on January 7th, 1964. Now, the church, Christianity, missionary ministers had a lot more leeway back then than they do now, okay? If you're posing as a minister, you can get past immigration, you can get into other countries, even communist countries, okay, without a lot of going over, okay? So it's not beyond the CIA or the military intelligence to use missionaries, news reporters, international trade businessmen, to go into countries that they're interested in, either to carry information or to carry items or to pass information or pick up information in other countries. Okay? That's standard practice. You got De Mornschild, an international oil geologist, going to places like Haiti and Costa Rica looking for oil where there is no oil. Okay? Why would he be going to places like that to look for oil where there is no oil? Even places like Yugoslavia. Because they're using his civilian cover to get, demographic information on that country. You know, he's sitting in coffee shops in San Jose, Costa Rica, sitting in coffee shops and restaurants in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. What's the feel of the public? Is there revolution in the street? He can report back, okay? And he doesn't have to be a trained CIA operative. Just like Albert Osbourne is not a trained CIA operative. Also, the fact that he's 70-something years old gives him a little bit more leeway. If he was a young 25-year-old, athletically built, white, sharp American, educated looking, he would get a little bit more, looking at. But he's a 70-year-old old man, probably faking a limp missionary. They're not going to think twice about, oh yeah, no big deal. And especially if he keeps going into Mexico all the time. And he uses this missionary thing as a cover. Now, a lot of these guys work contract for the CIA. It means they're not on the official payroll. They're not getting, they're not a G4, G5, whatever, getting a paycheck from the CIA. They're getting cash as a paid informant, like this Dallas T4, being handled by a CIA agent. Here, I need you to go in Mexico and find out what's going on here, what's going on there. Talk to this person, whatever. Or bring back this package. So they're going to get a lot less, scrutiny. You know what I'm saying? It's a perfect cover. And especially if you're going by two different identities, you've got double the cover. So it makes sense that one of their missions they would send him on is, hey, we got this guy. We need to get to Mexico City. He's not very smart. Doesn't know his way around. He doesn't speak Spanish. We need you to babysit him. Get him to Mexico City, show him around, show him where the Russian embassy is, show him where the Cuban embassy is. Keep an eye on him. Make sure he stays out of trouble and stays out of the whorehouses. And he gets back, in one piece. And you notice Albert Osbourne leaves the same day after Oswald left. And comes back to Laredo. Anyway, it says, let's see here. Dallas T4 reported that several officials of the Baptist Church in Mexico City have reported that they have no knowledge of a John H. Bowen or Albert Osbourne. Now, another question that comes up is, well, if the government killed Kennedy, wouldn't they know about Osbourne, and why would the FBI even bother investigating him? Well, it's a big government. There's a bunch of different agencies. There's a bunch of different offices. People keep things tight, on a need-to-know basis in their agency, in their investigative arm. There could be many, many groups in the CIA that have no idea about Albert Osbourne. I would say probably only 2 or 3 people in the CIA even know about Albert Osbourne. And then, if you put on top of that factor that you go with the theory that I'm pushing, is that there are right-wing, conservative, rogue elements inside the CIA, inside the FBI, that their bosses don't know about who they're working with. I mean, think about it. All they're doing, think about the life of a field agent in the FBI or the CIA. They're going out with money, passing out money to informants to do missions and give them information. And then they're going back and writing a report to their boss and say, well, this is what I did today, and this is what happened, and this is what they told me. Their boss isn't there watching him. As long as he's performing and bringing back good information that they can use, he's not going to, micromanage him. He's out in the field. He can do what he wants. So if you've got a whole group of people that are like-minded, they could carry out all kinds of nefarious missions, whether killing the president or importing drugs and selling that to make money to further operations, with nobody, in the, I guess you could say, the squares in the CIA, the regular establishment, even knowing about it. But once they do find out something, they get a whiff of that, oh my God, maybe some of our guys are involved. That's when you see the cover-up happen as they do their own investigation. They figure out some of their own people were involved in the assassination of the president. My God, this could destroy the FBI. This could destroy the CIA. So let's find out what is out there. This is why the FBI, this is why I think Hoover's letting this go, this investigation go on, because he's getting these reports every day, okay? And he's trying to cover his own ass. This is why he's authorizing his agents and the funding to go out and interview all these people about this Osbourne guy. Because if some of his guys are involved, he wants to know. If they can pin it on someone else, so much the better. Anyway, it says Dallas T4 reported that several officials of the Baptist Church in Mexico City reported they have no knowledge of John Bowen or Albert Osbourne. And what does that tell you? Well, that tells me that Albert Osbourne is posing as John Bowen or posing as himself and using that cover as a missionary for his visa to go down to Mexico City and do whatever he's doing down there, and he's really not doing anything with missionaries. He maybe has one church that he's working with, but nothing official. Okay? So that tells you right there a lot. Anyway, it says T4 reported that Osbourne normally resides in a native mud wall dwelling in Texmulucan, where the only person having knowledge of his movements is the teenage caretaker, who himself frequently visits his family in Osaka, Mexico, when Osbourne is not there. So Osbourne's got this kid that comes and watches over this place that he will stay sometimes, but the rest of the time Oswald is carrying out contract business for the CIA or whoever he's working for. On January 16, 1964, the caretaker disclosed that a wedding announcement had been received from a Mrs. Lola Loving, Millsboro, Oregon, announcing the wedding of her daughter, Sharon Ruth Loving, on October 20th, 1963. You see, so Osbourne's got people sending him money, supporting his missionary activities, and to verify it, he's got this kid picking up his mail at this mud hut, okay? So this kid's reading the mail. It says Dallas T4 reported that on January 21st, 1964, letters addressed to Bowen had been received at the Texmulucan, Mexico address from a Ostigua publishing company, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and from the Beam, 6248 Camp Bowie Boulevard, Fort Worth, Texas. On January 27, 1964, confidential informant Dallas T6, a confidential source abroad, reported that a check on the passport file, Department of External Affairs, Ottawa. So this is another informant inside immigration that the CIA has developed, okay, that can check files. Department of External Affairs, Ottawa, Ontario, indicates an Albert Osbourne was issued passport number 5605377 on October 10, 1963, through the office of the Canadian Consul, New Orleans, Louisiana, At that time, Osbourne indicated his mailing address as will call, and his permanent address since 1917 was 1441 Drummond Street, Montreal, Quebec. Osbourne reflected his date of birth as October 22nd, 1888. So let's see. 1963 minus 1888. So he's 75 years old. Wow. In Grimsley, see there's Grimsley again. 5'10", 200 pounds, blue eyes, dark brown hair, slight gray, single, and indicates he is a member of the clergy. You see, this is perfect. So you've got a guy who has a Canadian passport, born in England, posing as a missionary in the United States and Mexico. It's a perfect cover. He's 75 years old. No one's going to give him a second glance. Okay? Again, this is probably one of the reasons why they had him go with Oswald. Because here you have this young kid, American, doesn't know his way around, doesn't know anything. You got Osbourne, who's pretty good at, knows what's going on, where to go in Mexico, speaks Spanish. He can get to the border and say, yeah, this is my pastoral assistant, you know, Lee Oswaldovich, or whatever his name would be, you know. So, it's a perfect cover. Anyway, attached to his passport is an affidavit in lieu of... Oh, wait a minute. Hold on one second. I was going to take a look at something. Yep, just like I thought there. It's a YMCA in downtown Montreal. Where did Oswald stay when he first got back to Dallas? At the YMCA in Dallas. I mean, not a big, huge conspiracy connection there, but he's learning from Albert Osbourne. Well, where am I going to stay when I get back? Well, you just stay at the YMCA like I do. Okay? Until you find a room to rent. Very interesting. Alright, it says attached to his passport is an affidavit in lieu of guarantor indicating that he was at the time in New Orleans and was presently in transit. The passport contained a photograph of Albert Osbourne have been taken in October 1963. Copies of the photograph were obtained. So, you see, he applied for a new passport, okay? It says October 10th. That's within just a few days of him getting back from Mexico City. Now, on that Mexico City passport, okay, it's going to list all the places he's been. Every time he goes into Mexico, every time he goes into Canada, every time he goes to some foreign country, they're going to have the stamp in there. Okay? And so what he wants is a clean passport. So when he goes to England, there's no indication that he's going to all these different places. This is what the 9/11 terrorists did. Is either before they got on the flight or before they came to the U.S., they reapplied for passports saying they lost their previous passports. And that cleaned them of any indication that they had been to Pakistan, Afghanistan, all these different areas. Nowadays it's a little more difficult because I think they keep a digital record online. They share that information. But that's what he's doing. So, you see how all these things click into order, okay? The White House announces it's going to the South, to Dallas, for fundraiser. Automatically, Ruth Payne shows up from Washington, probably being debriefed there, swinging through, just happens to swing through New Orleans and pick up Marina Oswald, takes her back to Dallas. And of course, the Warren Commission will tell you that okay, packed his wife off to Dallas to get rid of her, so he can go down to Mexico City to get a visa, to get into Cuba, to get into Russia, so he can come back to Dallas and kill the President of the United States. And again, if you think about that in all logic, none of that makes any fucking sense. If you're going to kill the president, which you don't even know is going to be in Dallas, you have no idea the president's going to be in Dallas, okay? You have no idea you're going to be working at a building right next to where the president's coming by in Dallas. But somehow you concoct this grand scheme of going to Mexico City to get a visa, to get into Cuba, to get into Russia, to come back to Dallas and kill the President of the United States. You see how screwy the thinking of the Warren Commission is? And if you don't sit there and think about it for a second, you're like, oh yeah, he was a communist. Well, yeah, it makes sense he would have got into Cuba and got into Russia, and then come back to the United States and kill the president. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. But Oswald has no idea that the president is going to be in Dallas, but he packs off his wife to Dallas. Ruth Paine just happens to show up at the same time he wants to go to Mexico City. How convenient. At the same time, another guy who works for the CIA was standing in line behind him when he got his visa. How convenient. Another guy just happens to be a contract agent for the somebody, the right wing, the CIA, the FBI, somebody, just happens to sit by him on a bus going to Mexico City. And then just happens to leave the same day that Oswald comes back, and then conveniently applies for a new passport, and then also conveniently just happens to be in Grimsley the day of the assassination, goes back and visits his brother and sister he hadn't seen in years. And when the Scotland Yard interviews him, they're like, whoa, we hadn't seen him in years, and we were shocked that he came back. And then just conveniently, coincidentally, a call goes out to an embassy in London and the newspaper in Grimsley that watched Dallas for the fireworks. Something's going to happen. Okay? Isn't that convenient? Isn't that amazing how all that happens? Anyway, we'll keep going on with the coincidences. Also, two more things. His base seems to be out of New Orleans, which is the heart of this CIA operation, or rogue CIA operation, that's going to kill the president. You got Clay Shaw there, you got David Ferry. You've got all these actors there where they bring Oswald down to sheep dip him. Okay? Another thing, Albert Osbourne supposedly based out of Montreal. Clay Shaw would fly to Montreal, being flown there by David Ferry many times right before the assassination. We know this because Garrison has interviewed several of his young companions that flew with him to Montreal with David Ferry as the pilot and Clay Shaw. Montreal, they speak French, but also is a perfect place for French nationals, the Corsican Mafia, all these people to be associated, even be recruited for the assassination. Anyway, all right, we'll keep going. Let's see. You know, unlike the James Bond shows that we see, or these spy movies where they're using a bunch of young guys, this reminds me, I've read a bunch, I think I've read literally every single book about the Mossad and Shin Bet and Israeli military intelligence. Every book that I could find, because I like spy novels, and this is all nonfiction stuff. And I remember reading one book where this young guy who got out of the Mossad, I guess, he saw some things he didn't like. Said he was surprised at how many older guys that he ran into in the Mossad that the Mossad was using for field operations. And he would expect they would use younger guys. But he said he came to the conclusion that, one, the older guys would be more responsible, is not as rash, and they could be trusted. And that the older guys, and he's talking like people in their 50s and 60s, wouldn't raise red flags as much as if you show up with about 4 or 5 young guys, at an airport in Dubai, it's going to raise hackles. But if you show up with an older guy, 50, 60 years old, and he's a missionary cover, or he's an oil executive, or he's retired, or whatever he is, he can pass a lot easier. I thought that was interesting. So it makes sense. And then there was this other group of people that the Mossad would use, and they were local Jews. So you may have a group of Jews that were members of, citizens of Germany or Canada or wherever, and they would arrange to set up an apartment, or they would obtain a car with keys and they would leave it for the Mossad agent, or they would pick up mail, or they would take a picture of a certain area, or they wouldn't follow people and stuff like that. But they would do kind of subsidiary around, the hedges, I guess you could call it, type of work that would assist the agents once they got there. They weren't trained agents. They weren't card-carrying members of the Mossad.